When I stood in front of the mirror, trying on the dress he had just pinned together for me, I didn't expect my hands to tremble. But they did, slightly, uncontrollably, and I told myself it was just the cold. Just the cold. He stepped behind me with the measuring tape, his breath slow, his voice careful, and when his fingertips brushed the inside of my arm to check the sleeve line, something inside me jolted. Not lust. Not shame. Something older. Something I had buried. I told myself this was just a dress. Just a man I used to call my stepfather. Just a way to feel feminine again before I turned 55 next week. But then I caught his eyes in the mirror, still unreadable, watching, and suddenly it wasn't about the dress at all. Not anymore. I swallowed hard. My husband was texting me, asking if I'd be home soon. I didn't reply. Instead, I stepped closer to the mirror, pretending to smooth a seam, giving him more room to measure, more excuses to linger. And he did. He lingered. I felt it, not just the warmth of his hands, but the hesitation behind them. I should have stopped this long ago. I should have never come here. But if I'm being honest, brutally, terribly honest, I came to him because I wanted something I couldn't name. Let me tell you what happened, and how a simple dress fitting nearly unraveled everything I had spent a lifetime building. Before I take you through what I tried to bury, tell me in the comments, have you ever crossed a line you didn't know existed until it was too late? The text came in the morning, simple, polite, neutral. Still want to move forward with the dress? I have a free slot tomorrow after 4. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because of the message itself, but because of the name above it. I hadn't seen his name pop up on my screen in years. Not since the wedding, maybe even earlier. Not since I moved out. Married. Grew up. And now, all of a sudden, my old stepfather, the man who once sat at our dinner table, who used to make strong tea and wore cologne too heavy for a Sunday, was offering to make me a dress. For my birthday. I typed yes and deleted it. Then typed sure, I'll come by, and deleted that too. Eventually I settled on. Yes, that works. Thank you. Short. Impersonal. Controlled. But it didn't feel that way when I pressed send. It felt like I had just pushed open a door I wasn't supposed to find again. My husband was in the kitchen when I walked in. He was peeling an apple with slow, deliberate strokes. He didn't look up. "You're seeing your mother today?" he asked. I hesitated. Later. But I'm stopping by a tailor first. For the dress. A tailor? Just someone who knows my measurements already. It'll be quicker that way. He nodded, kept peeling. We were like that now, all practicality, no pause. Everything we said had been said before in some variation. The only new things between us were groceries and bills. I watched the way his hands worked, efficient, clean, methodical. I remembered when those hands used to touch me differently. When the same quiet could feel like comfort, not emptiness. He finished peeling, slid the apple toward me without a word. I didn't eat it. His workshop was just like I remembered, tucked behind his small house, with windows smudged by time and fabric rolls leaning tiredly against the walls. He opened the door before I knocked. "You're early," he said. Not unkindly. Just observant. "You're the same," I replied, and immediately hated myself for how it sounded, both too familiar and too distant. He didn't comment. Just stepped aside. Inside, the room smelled of dust and cedar. There was music playing softly, some classical piece I couldn't name, and for a moment, I felt young again. Ridiculously, painfully young. He motioned to the chair. "Let's get started. You brought the shoes?" I nodded, handed him the box. We didn't talk much as he took out the measuring tape, clipped it around his neck like he always used to, and stood behind me. His fingers were steady, detached. He measured my shoulder line first. Then waist. Then sleeve. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing suggestive. But still. When he reached for my wrist to measure down to my palm, our skin touched. Warm to warm. Brief. I looked at him. He looked at the tape. "You've lost weight," he said. "Age takes things away before it gives anything back," I said. He gave a faint smile. "Lift your arm?" I did. The sleeve fell. He adjusted it. I felt the weight of his presence behind me, just a little too close. Not improper, just close. "You remember how you used to hate fittings," he said lightly. "I hated the pins. And you always pricked me on purpose. Only when you fidgeted." I laughed. A real laugh, one I didn't expect. And then he said, more quietly, "You don't fidget anymore." The silence that followed was tight. Not awkward, but something deeper. A memory unspoken. I moved to the mirror. The muslin mock-up hung off my frame, imperfect but promising. I saw myself in profile. My body. My age. My loss. "You did a good job," I said. He nodded. "Still have to adjust the neckline. It gaps a bit." He stepped toward me, lifted the fabric near my collarbone. I watched his hands in the reflection. Strong. Deliberate. Hesitant. I breathed in. He breathed out. And for 1 second, the space between us blurred. I stepped back. Too quickly. He let go of the fabric. "You okay?" "Yes. Just dizzy." "You want water?" "No. I'm fine." He nodded, turned to jot down a note. The spell, if it had been one, was broken. On the way home, I kept seeing our reflection in the mirror. Not how we stood. But how we didn't move. That stillness, the almost of it all, pressed into me like a thumbprint on glass. Faint, but there. My phone buzzed. "Husband, did you get the fabric?" I stared at the screen. Typed, "Yes." He had good options. Then added, "He's starting the base tomorrow." He didn't reply. The silence felt strangely appropriate. That night, I folded the muslin carefully into my wardrobe. I touched the collar. My fingertips lingered. I told myself it was just a dress. But something told me it had never really been about the dress. The next afternoon, I returned to his workshop with a calmness that felt rehearsed. As if I'd been practicing how to walk in without letting the previous day's memory rise to the surface. I kept my expression neutral, my steps measured, my voice at an even pitch. I was here for the dress. That was all. He greeted me politely, his tone unchanged, but something in the way he stepped aside to let me in felt more cautious. There was more distance now, not physical. We stood just as close, but something intangible had widened between us, like a space neither of us knew how to cross without slipping. The room smelled of the same things, fabric, wood, the faint trace of aftershave he always used. But it felt warmer today. Or maybe it was me. Maybe it was the way my skin responded to this room now. He motioned to the platform. "If you're ready." I stepped up. Removed my coat. He draped the new fabric over my shoulders, a soft, sea glass green, light and elegant. His hands worked steadily, adjusting the shoulder seams, pinning the sides with methodical ease. But I noticed the small things, how his fingers hesitated slightly longer at my waist, how his breath caught just briefly when I turned my head and our eyes met in the mirror. We didn't speak much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't neutral either. It was a shared silence, charged, aware, deliberate. At one point, he reached across my chest to adjust the neckline, and his arm brushed lightly against mine. It wasn't a significant touch, not in isolation, but it felt different. Not accidental. Not avoidable. I stayed still, breathing slowly. I didn't pull away. I didn't speak. After a few more pins, he stepped back. It's taking shape. I nodded. It feels good. I meant the fabric. But that wasn't all. He looked at me in the mirror again, his reflection quieter than before, his eyes scanning mine for something I couldn't define. You always had an instinct for color, he said, voice low. You never liked red, even as a girl. No. Too loud, I said. Green was always softer. You wore it the day you left. I didn't respond. I remembered. He did too. We stood like that for a moment, me facing the mirror, him just behind me, both of us caught in a memory we hadn't spoken aloud. Then I turned, slowly, stepping down from the platform. He didn't move. I stood directly in front of him, the fabric rustling lightly between us. His eyes searched my face, waiting, perhaps, for permission or denial or an answer to a question neither of us had asked. I raised my hand to adjust the pin at my shoulder. It slipped. He reached up to fix it. Our hands touched. We both froze. And then, we kissed. It was brief. No words. No gestures leading to it. Just the meeting of mouths that had waited too long to pretend they hadn't wanted to. When it ended, we didn't move for a beat. He stepped back first. His expression unreadable. I shouldn't have, he began. I stopped him with a look. Don't. He nodded once, turned toward the sewing table. I picked up my coat, walked to the door, paused. Neither of us said goodbye. Outside, the air was sharp. I walked slowly, my steps echoing too loud in the empty street. Back home, my husband was on the phone. He waved a hand in greeting, continued his conversation. I went upstairs. Removed the coat. Stared at myself in the hallway mirror. My lips still felt warm. My hand slightly trembled. I should have felt guilty. I didn't. I felt something else entirely. I felt awake. Later, I sat alone in the kitchen. He came in, poured himself coffee. You're back early, he said. He finished sooner than I expected. Did you choose the fabric? Green. He nodded. No follow-up question. No interest. I stirred sugar into my tea. The spoon clinked too loudly. We sat there, two people living parallel lives at the same table, separated by years of silence disguised as peace. I thought of the workshop. The mirror. His hands. His breath. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the start of something I couldn't name yet, but already knew I wouldn't be able to stop. The next few days passed in a strange quiet. Not around me, life continued with its usual rhythms, but within me, something had shifted. I no longer felt like a passive observer of my life. There was a pulse now, a hum beneath the surface of everything. Not joy. Not even excitement. Just a low, constant awareness that something had begun, and it couldn't be undone. I didn't hear from him after that afternoon. He didn't text, didn't call, didn't reschedule the next fitting. At first, I told myself it was normal. He was giving space. Being careful. But as hours turned into days, I began to wonder if that kiss had unsettled him more than it had me. I replayed it over and over, not the physical part, which had been brief, restrained, almost mechanical. It was the moment before and the moment after that haunted me. The decision to lean in. The way we both paused, breathed, then moved as if compelled by some mutual agreement we hadn't verbalized. And the silence that followed, full of things we didn't have the courage to say. I kept waiting for a message. A simple one. Let's finish the dress. Or even, I'm sorry. Nothing came. Meanwhile, my husband was becoming more present. Not in a warm, intuitive way, but in that vague, hovering manner of someone who senses change but doesn't know how to ask about it. He'd linger in rooms longer than necessary. Comment on things he usually ignored, my perfume, the blouse I wore, the way I stirred my coffee. "New?" he asked one morning, nodding toward my earrings. "No," I said. "You've just never noticed them before." He didn't reply. Just sipped his tea and flipped through the news on his phone. But I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Not jealousy. Not suspicion. Just confusion. Like he couldn't quite place the version of me that had returned from the workshop. I kept busy. Cleaned closets that didn't need cleaning. Rearranged bookshelves. Took walks without purpose. But none of it dulled the itch in my chest. The tension didn't fade. It pooled quietly behind my ribs, waiting. By the fourth day, I gave in and called him. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Hello? It's me." A pause. "I know. I hesitated. Is everything all right?" Another pause. Longer. "Yes. I've just been thinking." "About what?" There was the faintest sigh. "You know what?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. "I didn't expect that to happen," he said. "I know. It wasn't planned." "I know. But I haven't stopped thinking about it." My fingers tightened around the phone. My heart was too loud in my ears. "Me neither," I said. Another silence. Then, carefully, he asked, "Do you want to continue?" I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room, the light through the curtains, the dent in the cushion beside me where my husband had sat that morning, the untouched tea on the table. "Yes," I said. He exhaled. Not relief. Something heavier. "Come tomorrow," he said. "We'll finish the fitting." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. All right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside my husband, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. It was steady, calm, familiar. For years, that sound had been my comfort. But now it only reminded me of how far we had drifted. We slept in the same bed, shared the same routines, spoke the same polite words. But we hadn't really seen each other in a long time. And maybe that was what had made me vulnerable. Not lust. Not rebellion. Just the slow erosion of intimacy. The absence of being seen. I closed my eyes and remembered how I'd looked in the mirror during the fitting. Not young. Not flawless. But alive. Not because of what he had done, but because of how I had felt in that moment. Like someone had looked at me and actually noticed me, not as a role, not as a responsibility, but as a woman. I fell asleep thinking of the dress. Of the fabric that still needed shaping. Of the space between our reflections in that mirror. The next afternoon, I returned to his workshop. He opened the door without speaking, just nodded and stepped aside. I followed him in. The air inside was heavier than before. Or maybe I was just more sensitive now. Every detail felt amplified, the creak of the wooden floor, the rustle of fabric, the scent of dust and lavender. The dress hung on a mannequin in the corner, partially finished. He gestured toward it. I made a few adjustments. "Try it on?" I changed behind the folding screen, the same way I had before. My fingers were slower this time, not from uncertainty but from anticipation. When I stepped out, he was already waiting, pins in hand. He circled me once, then moved in close to adjust the seam at my back. His fingers were precise, focused, but I could feel the restraint in every movement. Like he was afraid to let any part of him speak louder than it should. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Only when he stepped away did he finally say, "I've thought about what we're doing." "So have I." He nodded. "It's dangerous." "I know. And probably wrong." "I know that too. But still." "Yes," I said. "Still." He looked at me, eyes searching. "What is this for you?" I didn't have a clean answer. I could have said it was about the past. About unresolved feelings. About loneliness. But none of that was entirely true. "I don't know," I said. "But it's the first thing I've felt in a long time that wasn't numb." He didn't respond. Just looked at me for a long time. Then turned back to the mannequin and began adjusting the neckline again. We didn't touch. We didn't speak further. But the air between us was full of everything we didn't say. When I left that day, the dress was almost finished. And so was the line between what was safe and what was not. The morning after my last visit to the workshop, I woke with an unease that clung to my skin like moisture. There was no text, no missed call, nothing new waiting on my screen, but the silence itself was a message, one I was beginning to read fluently. I moved through my morning routine without speaking. My husband had already left for a business meeting, a short trip that would keep him away overnight. He'd told me over dinner 2 days ago, almost casually, and I'd nodded without reacting. But now, the knowledge of his absence shaped the edges of my day like a mold I was slipping into. I spent hours doing nothing of consequence, folding laundry that had already been folded, organizing the spice rack, checking the weather on my phone even though I wasn't going anywhere. The mundane became a shield. But behind it, a thought pulsed: what would happen if I simply went to the workshop unannounced? No scheduling, no formality. Just walked in and faced what we had both tried to contain. By early afternoon, the thought had turned into decision. I didn't text. I didn't call. I just got in the car. The drive was shorter than usual. Or maybe my thoughts blurred the distance. I parked outside the workshop and sat for a full minute, watching the way the sunlight fell across the faded curtains in his windows. Then I opened the door and stepped out. When I knocked, I half hoped he wouldn't answer. That I'd be forced to turn away and let the silence win. But the door opened within seconds. He looked surprised, but not startled. Just tired. The kind of tired that came from overthinking. "I didn't expect you today," he said. "I know." His eyes searched mine for a clue, then stepped aside without a word. I entered. The workshop looked the same, but something in the air was different. He'd been working. There were threads on the table, a patterned draft pinned to the wall, a steaming mug of tea on the windowsill. I didn't move to the platform. I stayed near the door. "I needed to see you," I said. "Not for the dress." He looked at the floor, then at me. "I thought maybe you'd changed your mind." "I didn't. But I thought maybe you had." He shook his head slowly. "I've been trying to. Believe me." We stood in silence. No dress. No pins. No mirrors. Just us. "Do you regret it?" I asked. His eyes closed for a moment before he answered. "No. That's what makes it harder." I stepped further into the room, slowly, giving him time to stop me. He didn't. "I don't know what this is," I said. "I don't have words for it." I just know it's real. He nodded. It is. Then, as if remembering himself, he turned back to the table, picked up a folded piece of fabric, placed it neatly in a box. He was trying to retreat into practicality. Into control. But I wasn't here for that. I don't want to be careful today, I said quietly. He froze. I don't want to pretend this is about a hemline or a neckline. We've done that. We've both lied well enough. But I'm tired. He looked at me, this time without blinking. His face held nothing theatrical, just a steady, aching truth. So am I, he said. We didn't move toward each other. There was no drawn-out approach. Just stillness. But in that stillness, the air shifted. Something cracked, not loudly, but deep. He motioned toward the door. Come with me. I followed him outside. We got into his car, wordless. I didn't ask where we were going. The way he drove, steady, deliberate, told me it wasn't far. 10 minutes later, we pulled into a narrow gravel drive beside a small white cottage. It looked aged, like it hadn't been lived in for years, but the garden was still tended, wild but not abandoned. This was my sister's place, he said as we stepped out. No one's been here since she moved abroad. The air smelled of pine and dust. Inside, the furniture was covered in sheets, but light poured through the wide windows. It was quiet. Removed from time. I come here when I need to think, he said, as he pulled off one of the coverings and revealed a worn armchair. I sat across from him, on a low stool near the fireplace. The room was cold, but I didn't mind. This isn't about starting something, I said. It's about understanding something. He nodded. I've wondered, for years, what might have happened if I'd stayed longer. If I hadn't pulled away when you moved out. I thought you didn't care, I admitted. I thought I was just your wife's daughter. Temporary. He looked at me then, really looked. I left because I cared too much. And because I didn't know what was right anymore. We were quiet again. Not out of avoidance this time, but because everything we needed to say had no easy shape. Eventually, he reached for a folded blanket and handed it to me. I took it, wrapped it around my shoulders, feeling the weight of his history pressed into the fabric. He poured water from a thermos into 2 chipped mugs and offered me one. We sat there, 2 people tangled in memory and silence, not searching for answers, just holding a moment together. Before I left, he helped me carry firewood to the porch. As he stood in the doorway, I looked at him and asked, "What now?" His voice was quiet. Now we finish what we started, even if we never name it. On the way home, I drove slowly. Not to delay returning, but to keep the space intact. To hold on to the strange stillness we'd built in that room of dust and pine. My husband wasn't home yet. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and stared out the window. Something had shifted. Not just between me and the man I'd once called my stepfather. But within me. Not everything needed to be named to be real. The day after the visit to the cottage, I found myself standing in front of the wardrobe, fingers hovering over the dresses as if I no longer recognized them. I wasn't searching for something to wear. I was searching for something that made sense. The way the fabric felt between my fingers, the way each hanger creaked slightly as I moved it, it all seemed too loud in the morning quiet. I didn't know why I was restless, only that I was. There was no message from him that morning. No follow-up. No invitation. And yet, everything inside me leaned in his direction. I kept thinking about the light in that room, how it made his face look younger, or maybe just softer. I remembered the chipped mug he handed me, the way our silences overlapped but didn't compete. But what I remembered most was his sentence. Now we finish what we started, even if we never name it. That line had settled into my thoughts like a stone at the bottom of a river, heavy, unmoving, but always present. By noon, I couldn't stay inside any longer. I told myself I needed to walk. To clear my head. But I didn't walk aimlessly. My feet led me toward his workshop without resistance, like I had no other destination to consider. When I arrived, the door was already slightly ajar. I hesitated before pushing it open. He was at the far table, working quietly. He looked up when he heard me, and I noticed the way his shoulders relaxed, just slightly, as if some invisible tension had softened. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," he said. I wasn't either. He set down the fabric he was holding and walked toward me, not too close, but close enough for me to feel the air change between us. The room smelled of warm cotton and dry wood. The dress was on the mannequin again, more finished than before, its lines sharper, the seams more deliberate. "I adjusted the waist," he said. "It needed to taper more." I nodded, stepped toward it, ran my fingers along the side seam. "It's beautiful." He didn't reply, just watched me, the silence between us filled with unspoken thoughts. "I want to finish it today," I said after a moment. "The whole thing." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "No," I said. "But I want to." He gave a quiet nod and turned to gather the last set of pins, a needle, thread, a piece of folded chalk. I stepped behind the screen and changed slowly, carefully. When I stepped out, the fabric hugged me more closely than before. It felt tailored not just to my body, but to everything I had become since the first fitting. He worked in silence, adjusting the sleeves, smoothing the curve of the neckline. I stood still, eyes on the reflection in the tall mirror in front of me. I hardly recognized the woman looking back. He stepped around me, crouched slightly to check the hem, then stood again. His hand brushed against my waist, not deliberate, not avoidable. My breath caught. The air between us shifted again, as if we'd stepped into the shadow of something larger than either of us. Neither of us spoke. And then, without warning, without ceremony, we kissed. We kissed. It wasn't long. It wasn't deep. But it left something irreversible in its place. When we stepped apart, I turned back toward the mirror, smoothing the fabric again, though it needed no smoothing. "I should go," I said. He didn't argue. I changed in silence, folded the dress, and placed it in the garment bag he handed me. At the door, he looked at me with something between sorrow and peace. "I won't ask anything of you," he said. "I know. I just needed to remember what it felt like to be close to something real again." I nodded. "Me too." I drove home slowly, fingers tight on the wheel, eyes forward. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed, evenly, as if the act of keeping pace with myself was the only thing left to do. When I arrived, the house was still empty. My husband's suitcase was gone from the hall, he hadn't returned yet. I walked up the stairs, hung the dress in the closet, and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the weight of the day settle in my spine. I wasn't ashamed. That was what surprised me most. There was no fire of guilt, no wave of regret. Only a quiet certainty that a boundary had been crossed, not impulsively, but consciously. Slowly. Repeatedly. It hadn't been one moment. It had been many. A sequence of yes to things I had once told myself I'd never want again. That night, I cooked dinner as usual. I turned on the porch light. I left the hallway lamp glowing. But I didn't wait up. I knew that whatever came next wouldn't arrive through the front door. It would have to begin inside me. And it already had. The morning began like most others, with the subtle disorientation that came from waking before my husband. I moved quietly through the bedroom, careful not to disturb the rhythm of his sleep, though I suspected it was a performance for both our sakes. He didn't shift when I closed the door behind me or when the kettle whistled in the kitchen. Some silences aren't accidental, they're cultivated, measured, and over time, they become the language we rely on when words no longer feel safe. I sat at the table with my tea, watching the pale steam curl toward the ceiling. There was a strange calm in me, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of calm that follows a decision, the moment when questioning gives way to acceptance. I had made a choice, perhaps not one I understood completely, but a choice nonetheless. My phone buzzed, face down on the table. For a moment, I didn't move. I just watched the screen light up against the wood grain. When I finally reached for it, I already knew who it was. "I need to talk to you. In person." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. I stared at the message longer than necessary, as though the words might reshape themselves into something else if I gave them enough time. But they remained steady, certain. I typed a response and deleted it twice before settling on, "Tell me when." His reply came less than a minute later. "Today. Around 4. Same place. The cottage." Of course. The hours between then and 4 passed without distinction. I moved through the day in a kind of suspended animation, my mind detached from the tasks my body performed. I folded laundry I didn't remember washing, ran a sink full of dishes only to discover they were already clean, wandered from room to room as if searching for a version of myself I'd misplaced. At one point, my husband appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, jacket slung over one arm. "Going out for a while," he said. "Might be late." I nodded. "Drive safe." He paused, maybe expecting something else, concern, interest, resistance. But I had none of those to offer, and he left without another word. The door closed behind him with the softest thud, and the silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ticking of the hallway clock echoing down the corridor. The road to the cottage looked different in daylight. Less mysterious, more honest. The trees that flanked the drive had dropped most of their leaves, and the gravel crunched more loudly under my tires. It felt exposed, as if the land itself had nothing left to hide. He was already waiting when I arrived. The front door was open, the warm light from inside spilling out across the threshold. I stepped through without knocking. He looked up from where he sat near the fireplace, a low flame flickering inside the old stove. There was no tea this time, no pretense of normalcy. Just the two of us and whatever we had left to say. "I didn't want to message this," he said. It needed to be said aloud. I nodded, waited. He stood, paced once across the rug, then stopped in front of the window. "There's something you don't know about me," he said. "Something I've never told anyone in your family." His voice was steady, but I could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "For 15 years, he continued, I was involved with someone. It wasn't an affair in the dramatic sense, no lies, no hiding in hotels. But it was secret, because it had to be. She was never part of our circle. She didn't want to be." I didn't speak. I felt no need to interrupt what had clearly been weighing on him longer than I'd been aware of his silence. "We had a daughter," he said. The words hung in the air, dense and motionless. "She's in her 20s now. Lives out of state. We're in touch, but not close. Her mother and I ended things a few years ago." I leaned against the edge of the table, the wood cool beneath my fingers. The weight of the moment didn't crash over me. It simply settled, layer by layer, until I felt myself rooted in it. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I didn't want you to think you were the only thing I've ever crossed a line for," he said. "Because I needed you to understand that I've been here before, not in the same way, but close enough. And it didn't end well." His eyes met mine. But it didn't ruin me either. And maybe that's what I'm afraid of now. I exhaled slowly. The truth, as it often does, arrived not with a bang, but a murmur. You're not ruining me, I said. I crossed the line, too. Willingly. Eyes open. He nodded, slowly. We didn't move toward each other this time. No contact. No mirror to reflect what we weren't ready to name. Instead, we stood in the shared quiet of understanding. Not forgiveness. Not confession. Just recognition. When I left the cottage, the sun was dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. I didn't rush. I drove slowly, letting the dusk settle around me. At home, the house was still empty. I moved through it like a guest, turning on a light here, closing a door there. Eventually, I sat at the foot of the bed, the dress still hanging in the open closet beside me. I reached for it, not to wear it, but to feel it. The fabric still held the warmth of all the hands that had shaped it. His hands. My decisions. The long series of moments that had led us here. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know how many versions of myself I had left to confront. But I knew that today, I had chosen truth. However quiet. However incomplete. And for now, that was enough. I woke the next morning with an unsettling sense of stillness, the kind that follows after a decision has been made but before the consequences fully arrive. My body felt heavy, not from exhaustion but from the weight of emotional motion. I didn't move for a long time. The room was dim, and the house was quiet. My husband had left early again, his absence marked by the folded towel on his side of the bed and the faint scent of aftershave lingering in the hallway. The dress still hung in my closet, perfectly preserved in its garment bag. I had no intention of wearing it today, but I unzipped it slightly, let my fingers slide across the fabric, and for a moment, simply stood there, holding it between two fingers like something fragile and unspoken. By mid-morning, I was walking in the direction of the park, an open, neutral space where I wouldn't have to talk or perform or pretend. The sky was gray, the kind of dull that made everything look slightly faded. I walked slowly, my pace more about passing time than covering ground. I didn't check my phone until I was nearly halfway through the loop. The message was short. Clear. And it changed everything. Today's the last fitting. If you want it finished. I stared at the screen, reread the words. They weren't a question, and they weren't an invitation. They were a point of no return. When I arrived at his workshop later that day, the lights were already on, casting a soft glow through the curtained windows. I hesitated just outside the door, unsure if I was stalling or savoring the moment before stepping inside. But eventually, I pushed it open. He stood by the work table, carefully laying out the tools in a straight line, chalk, scissors, a pin cushion shaped like a tomato. He didn't greet me with words, just looked up briefly and nodded. That was enough. The dress was already waiting for me, pressed and perfect, resting across the mannequin like something asleep. I stepped behind the folding screen, undressed slowly, folded my clothes with unusual care. I wasn't nervous. I was attentive. Present in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. When I stepped out, he was adjusting the floor-length mirror, angling it toward the light. He motioned for me to stand in front of it. I did. The dress slid over my skin like it belonged there. He stepped closer, eyes focused, hands steady. He adjusted the shoulder, the bodice, the way the hem grazed my calves. Every motion was deliberate, restrained, necessary. We didn't speak. But the silence between us was anything but empty. He crouched to pin the hem, and as he rose, I caught his reflection behind me. He didn't look at the dress. He looked at me. Not the woman being measured, but the woman standing still, breathing quietly, existing in the space between want and restraint. I turned. The mirror no longer mattered. The pins, the fabric, the dress, they had done their part. What came next was as inevitable as breath. We spent the night together. No conversation. No ceremony. Just hours, unmeasured, given without resistance. It wasn't an affair, not in the way people understand them. It was something quieter, older, forged from the pieces of a shared history that neither of us had ever really let go. In the morning, I rose early, dressed slowly, carefully, and left before the sun had fully risen. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. The streets were still empty as I walked home. The town felt suspended, as if waiting for the day to catch up to itself. When I reached the front gate of my house, I paused, letting the quiet settle one last time before stepping inside. My husband was still asleep. I made coffee. Sat at the table. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat with it. With all of it. The days that followed were marked not by drama but by a heavy, quiet weight. Nothing exploded. Nothing was said. Life continued in its same quiet rhythm, as though nothing had shifted, and yet everything had. I moved through my routines, laundry, errands, answering emails, with a precision that felt almost performative. Each movement carefully calibrated to look normal from the outside, while inside, I carried something new, something wordless. I kept thinking it would feel more dramatic. I expected shame, fear, maybe even guilt. But instead, what came was stillness. Not pieces. Peace was too clean a word, but something close to surrender. I had crossed a line. And instead of chaos, I found clarity. The first time I saw my husband after that night, he was standing in the kitchen, pouring cereal into a bowl. He looked tired. Not outwardly, but in the slow way he moved, in the way his eyes avoided mine when he handed me a spoon. We didn't speak much that morning. There wasn't anything obvious to say. I found myself watching him more, studying the slump of his shoulders, the frown that lingered between his brows even when he wasn't thinking. I realized I didn't hate him. I didn't even blame him. We'd both let something slip too far, for too long. We'd grown comfortable in the silence until the silence became our only language. That night, while he was brushing his teeth, I sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the closed closet. The dress was still inside, untouched since the day I brought it home. I hadn't worn it. I wasn't sure I ever would. He came out of the bathroom, towel around his neck, hair damp. I looked at him and opened my mouth to speak, but stopped. I didn't know what I wanted to say. He didn't ask. We went to bed like we always did. Lights off. Backs turned. The mattress wide enough for the distance between us. At work the next day, I kept glancing at my phone, expecting, maybe even hoping, for a message. There was none. I told myself that was good. That it meant we both understood something unspoken. That what had happened had been enough, and maybe that was all it was ever meant to be. But just after noon, a package arrived. It was a small, carefully wrapped box. No note. No name. But I knew immediately where it had come from. Inside was a single item, a thimble. Worn, silver, with the faintest dent on one side, like it had been used for years. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight. It was light, but meaningful. Practical, but personal. I placed it on the shelf above my desk and didn't mention it to anyone. That evening, my husband suggested dinner out, something we hadn't done in weeks, maybe months. I said yes, more out of curiosity than enthusiasm. We went to a quiet restaurant we used to love. The food was the same. The lighting dim. The conversation mild. He talked about work, a colleague's retirement, a possible trip in the fall. I nodded, responded, smiled where appropriate. But the entire time, I felt like I was listening to someone read from a script we'd both forgotten how to improvise. Halfway through the meal, he paused and looked directly at me for the first time that night. "You've been different lately," he said. I kept my face calm. "How so?" He shrugged. "Hard to explain. Just quieter, maybe." I waited, unsure what he wanted me to say. "Are you unhappy?" he asked. That word hung between us like a fragile thread. I took a sip of water. Placed the glass down carefully. "I'm not sure I know what that means anymore," I said. He nodded, slowly. "Neither do I." We didn't speak much after that. We finished our meal, paid, and drove home in silence. But not the kind of silence we were used to. This one was more aware. Sharper. Edged with something neither of us could name. Later that night, I opened the closet and took out the dress. I laid it across the bed, ran my hands over the fabric, tracing the seams he had stitched so carefully. It was beautiful. Clean lines. Elegant cut. It fit me in more ways than one. I didn't try it on. I folded it back into its bag, zipped it, and placed it gently at the bottom of the wardrobe. It was done. Whatever it had been for, it had served its purpose. And now, I needed to decide what came next. Not as a woman split between two men, but as someone who had been asleep for too long, and was finally starting to wake. I woke up before the sun the next morning, the quiet still clinging to the walls of the house like an afterthought. The room was gray, not from shadow but from the absence of warmth. My husband's side of the bed was empty, and I could hear the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen below. It was too early for him to be making breakfast, and yet he was. Something had shifted. I felt it in the way my body tensed before I even swung my legs out of bed. I didn't rush downstairs. I took my time, moved with intention, as though speed would somehow accelerate whatever was waiting for me. When I entered the kitchen, he was at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. One was already set on the table, my usual. No cream. No sugar. We hadn't spoken much since the dinner. Not about us. Not about anything that sat below the surface. He turned as I entered, nodded, and slid the mug toward me across the table. I sat down, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. We both stared into our drinks like they might say what we couldn't. Finally, he spoke. "There's something I found," he said. His voice was low, not confrontational, but careful. Like a man testing the strength of thin ice beneath his feet. My chest tightened. "I wasn't looking," he added quickly. "It was just there. On the desk. I guess you forgot to close it." I didn't ask what. I already knew. The message thread. I had left my email open the day before. The package delivery confirmation from the courier. The return address label, his name. I looked up. He wasn't angry. Not visibly. But there was something else in his eyes. Not betrayal. Not pain. Something closer to finality. "I didn't read much," he said. I didn't need to. Just the subject line. I could tell what it meant. I nodded slowly, the weight of silence pressing down on my shoulders. I didn't deny it. Didn't lie. There was no point. "I'm not asking for an explanation," he said. "I just need to understand one thing." He looked at me directly, and it struck me how long it had been since we'd really seen each other. Was it worth it? That question didn't sting. It didn't even surprise me. What surprised me was how long it took me to answer. I don't know, I said. Not yet. He absorbed that, looked away, then stood. Walked to the window. The sky was lightening outside, streaks of soft blue beginning to filter through the clouds. I suppose that's fair, he said after a while. I don't know either. I expected more. A confrontation. A demand. Even a slammed door. But he didn't give me any of those things. Just quiet acceptance. The kind that was more difficult to hold than anger. He turned back toward me. I'm going to stay at the apartment for a while. Just need time. I think we both do. I nodded again. No protest. No plea. He packed a bag within the hour. No rush, no slamming drawers. He folded his shirts. Paused by the hallway closet. Looked at the family photos we hadn't updated in years. Then he left. When the door clicked shut, I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the empty space where his keys used to hang. The house felt cavernous. Not with loneliness, but with space I hadn't realized I needed. It wasn't relief. It wasn't sadness either. It was something in between, something difficult to name. Later that afternoon, I walked to the workshop. The sky was overcast, and the air had that scent of distant rain. I wasn't sure if he'd be there, but I walked anyway. I needed to. When I arrived, the lights were off. The curtains drawn. I knocked once. Twice. No answer. I stood there for several minutes, not moving, not expecting anything. And then I saw the note. It was taped to the door, folded once, my name written across the front in small, neat letters. I opened it with cold fingers. I had to go. Needed to. You understand that part, I think. But I left something for you, back at the cottage. It's yours if you want it. If not, leave it be. No pressure. You know who. I didn't hesitate. The drive to the cottage was quiet, the road nearly empty. I passed the same landmarks as before, familiar, comforting in their consistency. When I arrived, the key was under the pot on the porch, just like last time. Inside, everything was the same. The furniture covered. The smell of old wood and distant smoke lingering in the air. And there, on the small table by the window, was a box. Not large. Not dramatic. Inside it, I found the dress. Folded carefully, but not perfectly. Like it had been touched, held, maybe even worn once. Beneath the dress was a small bundle of letters. Unmarked, unsealed. I didn't open them there. I sat for a long time, watching the gray sky through the glass, the wind pulling at the trees just beyond the clearing. When I finally stood to leave, I took the box with me. I didn't know yet what I would do with it. But I knew I would never look at it as just a dress again. I didn't open the letters right away. They sat untouched on my desk for almost 2 days, resting beside the folded dress as if they were part of the same story, the same breath. The box itself remained closed most of the time, but I would sometimes reach for it without meaning to, run my fingers along the grain of the cardboard, press lightly on the edge of the lid, then stop. I wasn't avoiding them. I was waiting. For quiet. For clarity. For some internal shift that would tell me the moment was right. It came on a Sunday. The sky was clean and still, and the light in the kitchen turned a warm amber against the cabinets. I made tea, sat down at the table, and pulled the bundle toward me. There were 5 envelopes, folded without glue, each one numbered in the corner in his careful, almost architectural handwriting. I read them slowly. The first was not about me at all. It was about her, his daughter. About the woman he had loved quietly for over a decade and the daughter who had grown up away from all of us. He wrote about her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she challenged him. He wrote about missed birthdays, unanswered questions, and the guilt that never really left. Not once did he defend himself. He simply told the truth. The second was about my mother. About how their marriage began with promise and restraint and how both eventually turned into resentment. He admitted that he had tried. That he had failed. That I had become, in some confusing way, the only real thread connecting them long after everything else had frayed. The third was about me. He wrote that I had always been sharp, quiet, observant. That I had a way of disappearing in plain sight. That he used to watch me from the doorway when I was reading on the floor, knees tucked under me, hair always half pulled back with no concern for how it looked. He wrote that he had wanted to protect me. Not from the world, but from the dullness it tried to press into people. That when I smiled at him in the kitchen that last year, something inside him paused, not for love, not for desire, but for recognition. That he never forgot the sound of my voice saying goodbye. The fourth was shorter. It was about the dress. He told me how carefully he chose the fabric, how he adjusted the seams more than once not because they needed it, but because it gave him an excuse to look again. How, while pinning the hem, he realized he'd never measured anyone so carefully. That it was never just about the dress, but the act of noticing someone who didn't ask to be seen. The final letter had no structure. It read like thoughts unraveling in real time. He said he didn't regret what happened. That he didn't expect forgiveness, or even understanding. Only that he hoped I had found something in all of it that belonged to me. Sometimes, he wrote, we hold too tightly to rules that were never really ours to begin with. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we loosen just enough to feel alive again. I folded the letters back together, tucked them into their envelopes, and placed them carefully in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't need to reread them. They had done what they came to do. In the days that followed, I moved differently. Not dramatically. But the way I stood felt straighter. The way I spoke felt more deliberate. People noticed small things, friends commented on my clarity, on the way I looked at them with a kind of steadiness I hadn't carried before. I didn't explain. I didn't owe anyone that. My husband didn't come back. He called, once, to tell me he was renewing the lease on the apartment for another 6 months. There was no tension in his voice. Only resignation. And something else, respect, maybe, or fatigue. We didn't argue. We didn't cry. We just acknowledged that the space between us had become more honest than the closeness ever was. I hope you're okay, he said. I am, I answered. And for the first time, I meant it. The dress remained in the closet, untouched. Not hidden, not displayed. Just there. A marker. A memory. Eventually, I returned to the cottage one last time. Not to find him. I knew he wouldn't be there. I went to water the plants. The garden had grown wild in the weeks since I'd last visited. Leaves curled over the path, dry stems brushed against my arms. I cleared the overgrowth gently, trimmed back what needed it, and sat for a while on the wooden steps. The wind passed through the trees slowly, like a hand over a page. I stayed until dusk, then locked the door behind me. Back home, the evening air drifted in through the open windows. I made tea, lit a candle, and sat on the couch with the lights low. No music. No television. No one. Just me. And it was enough. The truth is, stories don't end with thunder. They end in breath. In a moment of stillness where everything sharp becomes soft, and the world finally lets you rest inside your own skin. This was mine.